Okay, so for tonight, I have a little talk about body fat and what's like the ideal body fat percentage to be at. And what kind of made me think of this was this weekend. I was talking with a guy, and he was telling me he was not, I guess he wasn't like extremely overweight. He had like a few extra pounds, and basically in the belly region. And so he was like, I'd really just sort of like to get rid of this. And he kind of grabbed his midsection. Then he says this. He kind of lifts up here. He says, I don't really want to lose any weight. I just kind of want to redistribute a little bit and tone up a little bit. So by redistribute, I'm assuming he means like, get rid of the fat, maybe replace it with a little bit of muscle. He didn't necessarily equate fat loss with weight loss. This is actually a very common thing that I see a lot of times with people who are wanting to tone up or, tone a particular area. But then as soon as you start talking about weight loss, they're like, well, I'm not really trying to lose weight. I'm just, trying to tone up. And this is always seems a little odd to me because the idea that you can lose fat or tone up without losing weight. Although I suppose it's technically possible, but generally, you're talking like you'd have to be eating a very specific way, doing a lot of weight training. So if you were trying to replace that fat with muscle, it's difficult for most people to just build muscle at the same time that they're losing fat. Not entirely impossible, but it is more difficult. Generally speaking, when you lose body fat, you're going to lose weight. And it's almost, to give you some examples here too, fat has mass to it. It has weight to it. So when you lose 1 pound of fat, 1 pound should go down on the scale, right? Does that make sense? If you're trying to lose, so in other words, if you don't see that pound down, then it's hard to, know for sure if you lost, body fat. Now, sometimes if your diet changes dramatically, so let's say you start adopting a much higher carbohydrate diet, you could potentially increase your weight through the fact that your body stores carbs with a lot of water. And so your weight could go up, but you could be technically losing fat at the same time. So that it is possible in some cases to see your weight go up while losing fat at the same time. However, we're talking like a pound or two. If someone has tries to lose 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 20 or more plus pounds of fat, then their weight is going to take a big drop, right? Now, I put some numbers up here to give you some calculations just to kind of think about this. So I put two people up here. We have Jane and Joe, one that has a lot of weight to lose and one that has a little bit of weight to lose. Jane is, we'll say they're both in the 40 to 59 age bracket, and Jane is at 39% body fat, and she weighs 290 pounds. And that means that her body fat in pounds, if we do the math, is 113 pounds of body fat. So that's a lot of body fat. 113 of her 290 pounds is fat. Now, just to give you some perspective, the ideal fat in pounds that we carry on us is roughly 20 to 30 pounds, give or take. So meaning that each person should roughly have on their body 20 to 30 pounds of quote-unquote essential fat. Because in other words, if you were fat-free, you'd be dead, right? You need a certain amount of fat in your body for just proper hormone function and health. So that means that if we were to subtract that 20 to 30 pounds from her 113 pounds, we would have roughly her target fat loss goal, right? So what's that, like 80 pounds, give or take? She probably needs to lose about 80 pounds of fat or 80 pounds on the scale to be at a much healthier place. Joe at 29% fat at 180 pounds, he still has 52 pounds of fat. But if we subtract out the 20 to 30 pounds of essential fat, you can see his target weight loss is more closer to like 20 to 30 pounds. Still decent amount of fat to lose, but a lot less than Jane has to lose, right? Now, body fat percentages, I put down here just the recommendations for men and women in the 40 to 59 age bracket. This is from the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. You can see that men are recommended to be somewhere between 11 to 21%, so it's kind of a broad range there, to be quote-unquote healthy, and that's in the 40 to 59 bracket.
How come age matters though?
Mainly because as we get older, there is, for women especially, you'll notice that if you look at the numbers for women at a younger bracket, it'll be even lower. but generally speaking, that as women get over, especially over 40, 50, starting getting into menopause, what happens is that as the ovaries shut down the production of estrogen, our fat tissue actually takes over the production of estrogen. So meaning that in order to balance hormones, there needs to be enough fat available in order to keep estrogen levels in balance. But on the flip side, excess fat causes there to be excess estrogen production, which is bad for our health, and that's why it may potentially be linked to certain cancers like breast cancer and other estrogenic cancers when you have a lot of excess body fat. Like you essentially have higher than normal levels of estrogen.
So does that percentage go up as you age?
So it goes up slightly. Also, the other thing is that there are a few other reasons why, as far as body fat. For example, there's some of this that's been a little bit debunked, so you have to buy this with a grain of salt. But there's some thinking that with cancer, being you might have heard this before, that a lot of people or oncologists who are essentially wanting you to be at a heavier weight because those who have, and they're older, especially for like bone density and cancer survival, generally you see like at a heavier weight, it tends to be associated with healthier outcomes or less, you're not.
Because my doctor told me, because I'm a small frame, that it got a bigger chance for osteoporosis.
Right, yeah, so now there's some truth but also some myths to that, because one of the problems with that, this is just one of the problems, and actually there's a good video by Stephen Guyenet, does a really good sort of debunk of this, taking a lot, like looking at it from a bigger perspective and looking at the actual data. One of the confounders when you start looking at association is that, take cancer for example, when a lot of these cancer patients are dying, they're very malnourished, right? They're very small weights. So now if you were to take and say, well, this person's at a small weight and they died, therefore being at a small weight means it increases your chance of dying. Well, yeah, partly because the cancer essentially is eating that person alive, basically, right? It's using up their energy. So if we were to simply just look at small people and use that as our baseline, not realizing that the disease itself may be what contributed to their smaller size. Not that the smaller size contributed to the disease, right? So it's an association, not necessarily causation. Being there's actually, I have a video I like to share with some people who talk about this. That's another oncologist who talks, again, she debunks this, saying that no, what you really want to be, what we want our people to be at is a healthy weight, because we know that obesity and excess weight is a risk for cancer, it doesn't decrease risk. So you don't want to be going around promoting people being overly heavy. Oh, I'm just, I'm 30 pounds overweight because I just want to, make sure I don't, die of cancer. It's like, no, that's increases risk of cancer, not decreases it. So we want to be at a healthy weight and a healthy body fat percentage, more importantly, right? So we want the weight that we are, because there is a phenomena, sometimes referred to as metabolic syndrome or skinny fat, where many people, I've had a few people I've tested over the years that were very small as far as their weight. Most people would say, you don't need to lose any weight, you look fine. But the problem was they had a very high body fat percentage. So even though they're at a small weight, they have the same sort of metabolic syndrome, sometimes even worse than what you see in obese people, because they have a very high percentage of body fat while at a small weight, meaning that essentially their lean mass is very, very low. Because if you weigh, let's say 130 pounds, but you're at 40% body fat, that means you have very little lean mass, and that lean mass is what's important for like bone density and other health things, right? So you want to have the ideal lean mass and body fat percentage. Now this guy, he told me he only weighs about 135 pounds. This is a man at 135 pounds. That's pretty skinny, right, for most guys. And he has, the pot belly. So that means it's like, wow. I said to him, I go, what was your, when you were a young man, because he was probably in his late, I would say 50s, so I was like, when you're in your 20s, 30s, what was your typical weight? Because I was like 125 pounds. I'm like, wow, okay. So now I said, well, I said, when you think about it, you're a little older. Do you think you have the same muscle mass that you had when you were 20? He's like, no, probably not. I was doing rock climbing and all. So I said, so yeah, so you already lost a little bit of muscle. So you're looking at, if you lost 10 pounds, that almost puts you close to where you were when you were, younger. And so meaning that, do you really think that because you're older now, that being an extra 10 pounds overweight is healthier? Now bear in mind, he's 135 pounds, not obese, right? He just wants to get rid of that little extra bit of fat. So I was just trying to convince him to say, not necessarily that you need to be 125 pounds, but just think about it logically. If you were 125 pounds at 20 years old, and you're now in your late 50s and you're 135 pounds, where do you think the extra 10 pounds is coming from? It's not muscle, right? It's coming from a little bit of excess body fat. So that means that if you are going to try to get to your ideal weight, you're probably going to have to lose a little bit of body fat. Now, also I wanted to show you these. 1 pound of fat, approximately, so if you take a pound of fat and you weigh it on the scale, it weighs a pound, has locked up in it roughly 3,500 calories. So 3,500 calories in 1 pound of fat. Or another way of thinking about that is so let's look at it from just energy perspective. Let's use an example using McDonald's cheeseburgers. So 1 McDonald's cheeseburger has about 313 calories. So that means that if you had 5 pounds of fat, you have 55 cheeseburgers. Or 1 pound of fat is 11 cheeseburgers worth of energy. So if you had 5 pounds of fat in your body, that means you have stored on you 55 cheeseburgers that are worth of energy that are just sitting there waiting to be tapped into. Or 12 pounds of fat, 132 cheeseburgers. 40 pounds of fat on your body that you're trying to get rid of, 440 cheeseburgers. Whereas if you think about it, you're walking around with 440 cheeseburgers worth of energy. They say that the average marathon runner, just to get perspective, if you look at a lean marathon runner, and you might think they can't be like an ounce of fat on that person, but the average marathon runner has roughly 10 pounds. So meaning they have 110 cheeseburgers worth of energy that they can tap into, and that's why they don't just drop dead in the middle of a race, right? Because they have plenty of energy. Even at a very lean state, we have a lot of energy because fat is stored very, very densely. Now if we come back to these two, Jane at 290 pounds, at 113 pounds of body fat, that's 1,244 cheeseburgers. Whereas Joe, 574 cheeseburgers worth of energy. So I say all this, kind of partly to point out that, when it comes to toning, it is going to equate to weight loss in most people, with very few exceptions. So, if you're one of those people where you're like, well, I don't want to weigh myself because I just don't ever, I'm not really into that. I'm just trying to tone up, which I hear all the time, drives me nuts because it's like it's really a myth that you're gonna, tone up and not lose any weight in most cases. Like I said, there might be a few exceptions, when you're talking just a few pounds, several pounds, but generally speaking, the vast majority of people are going to need to see the weight go down in order to see the toning. And that's going to happen primarily through the caloric deficit that we produce. Remember, the food part is the most potent driver of fat loss. Exercise is like the icing on the cake. That's what speeds everything up. But if you try to just exercise and you don't reduce calories, then you find yourself very frustrated because you're feeling good, you got better energy and you're improving bone density, you got a lot of other benefits of exercise, but fat loss is very ineffective with exercise unless you can do a lot of it if you're not making changes in your diet at the same time. That's it. Have a good night.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Watch out for that.